Bax had always thought he was immune to the strange allure of Vega Prime's sprawling marketplace. A human in a vast alien galaxy, he was used to blending into the background, preferring routines and the safety of predictability. But today, something felt different. As he strolled past stalls of exotic goods, his senses were hit with colors, smells, and sounds from worlds he'd never even heard of. The marketplace was alive in a way he had never experienced before. Hovering lights cast a surreal glow over the crowds, and the smell of unfamiliar spices lingered in the air. Alien vendors hawked shimmering fabrics, crystals with inner light, and mechanical devices he couldn't begin to understand. Yet, amid the chaos, a feeling crept over him, a pull he couldn't quite define. "Just get your supplies and go," Bax muttered to himself, trying to shake the sensation. But fate had a different plan. Bax turned a corner and found himself face to face with an alien woman. Her skin shimmered a deep violet under the marketplace lights, her eyes an intense green that seemed to hold a universe within them. The moment their gazes met, a strange thrill shot through him. Her stare was unflinching, curious, almost predatory. "Human," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum that wrapped around him like silk. "Lost, are we?" Bax chuckled, trying to hide his nervousness. "Just here for supplies." She leaned closer, her gaze unwavering. "Perhaps you'd like more than just supplies. Vega Prime has many offerings." Her voice was playful but laced with something deeper, something that made Bax's heart pound in a way he wasn't used to. He'd heard stories about encounters like these, brief, thrilling, and often dangerous. But this felt different. He could sense an invitation, a doorway opening to a place where his carefully planned life could be left behind. "What's your name, human?" she asked, tracing the edge of a crystal that glowed faintly in her hand. "Bax," he replied, barely managing to keep his voice steady. "Bax," she echoed, savoring the syllables. "I'm Zura, and I think you're exactly who I've been looking for." He raised an eyebrow, trying to play it cool. "I'm just here for some water, maybe a snack." Zura smirked, tilting her head. "Ah, but you didn't come to Vega Prime for just water, did you?" In that moment, he realized he didn't know the answer. He had come for something, though he couldn't put his finger on it. Perhaps it was curiosity, or the faint hope of finding something more than the humdrum of daily life on Vega Prime. Zura's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, whispering, "If you want to find out what you're truly here for, meet me after sunset. The marketplace can show you more than you think, if you're willing to see it." And with that, she slipped back into the crowd, her violet form vanishing among the bustling beings of the market. As the suns of Vega Prime began to dip below the horizon, casting a crimson glow over the city, Bax found himself standing in the same spot, watching the lights and waiting. For the first time in a long time, he felt alive, on the edge of something extraordinary. He had no idea what awaited him tonight, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to walk away. As darkness blanketed Vega Prime, the market transformed into a spectacle of light and sound. Hover lights hummed in the air, casting shimmering reflections on the bustling crowd below. Bax stood at the meeting spot, his nerves on edge as he scanned the faces around him. He was on high alert, yet a quiet thrill had taken hold of him, stronger with each passing moment. "You came," a voice murmured from behind, low and familiar. Bax turned to see Zura emerging from the shadows, her violet skin almost glowing in the twilight. Her presence was both alluring and intimidating, and her eyes held that same mysterious intensity that had gripped him earlier. "I wasn't sure I would," Bax admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. She offered him a smile, a knowing curve of her lips that hinted she'd expected him all along. Few resist the call of Vega Prime's night. It has a way of drawing out those who crave more from life. "And what exactly am I here for?" he asked, trying to keep his tone steady. Zura tilted her head, looking at him as if assessing his very soul. "That depends. Vega Prime is a place of many secrets, some benign, others not. But tonight, I can show you one secret if you're willing to follow." Without another word, she turned and began walking, slipping through the crowd with an ease that left Bax scrambling to keep up. They weaved through the narrow, winding paths of the marketplace, past vendors hawking strange fruits and shimmering artifacts, through pockets of laughter and haggling voices, until they arrived at a dimly lit alleyway away from the chaos. The hum of the marketplace dulled, and a heavy silence settled around them. "What is this place?" Bax asked, a twinge of anxiety creeping into his voice. "This," Zura said, gesturing to a metal door hidden in the wall, "is where you'll find what you're truly looking for." Before he could ask what she meant, she pushed the door open and motioned for him to follow. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with walls lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. In the center of the room was a circular platform, hovering slightly above the ground and pulsating with energy. "Step on the platform," she said, her voice soft yet compelling. Bax hesitated, glancing at her for reassurance. Her eyes held a quiet certainty, one that steadied his nerves just enough for him to take the step. As he placed his foot on the platform, a jolt of energy surged through him, making his pulse quicken. What's happening?" he stammered, gripping the edge of the platform. Zura approached, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're about to see something extraordinary. Hold still and let it happen." In an instant, the world around him shifted, colors blurred, sounds became distant echoes, and his vision warped as he felt himself transported somewhere entirely different. When the haze lifted, he found himself standing in what looked like a vast, crystalline chamber, filled with towering columns that sparkled like stars. "Where are we?" he whispered, unable to mask his awe. "This," Zura said, her voice echoing around them, "is the nexus of Vega Prime. Few ever see this place, and fewer still understand it." Bax turned to her, his heart racing as he took in the sight. "Why show me this?" he asked, trying to wrap his mind around the surreal beauty of the chamber. "Because," she replied, her gaze softening, "you're different. I've watched many humans pass through Vega Prime, most content with their routine, but you crave something deeper." Her words resonated with him in a way he couldn't explain. She was right. He'd always felt like there was something more out there, something just beyond his reach. And now, standing in the nexus, he felt the elusive feeling take root in his chest. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A glint of amusement flashed in her eyes. "Now we see if you have the courage to embrace the unknown." She reached out and pressed her hand to one of the crystalline columns. Immediately, the chamber began to pulse with light, and an otherworldly hum filled the air. The columns around them glowed brighter, casting shifting patterns across the walls. "You wanted an adventure, human," she said, her voice filled with promise. "This is where it begins." Bax took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the nexus course through him. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He was no longer the man he'd been when he stepped into that marketplace. The journey had begun. The nexus chamber pulsed with a life of its own, each crystalline column humming with an energy that was both foreign and oddly comforting. Bax felt as if he were standing at the center of an ancient heartbeat, one that had resonated through the galaxy for millennia. "What exactly is this place?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder and a hint of apprehension. Zura glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "The nexus is a crossroads of knowledge, a place where worlds connect and secrets are kept safe. Those with access to it can glimpse truths from all corners of the galaxy. But it's not just a library of knowledge. It's a force, a power that only a few can harness." "And why me?" Bax pressed, his curiosity overriding his caution. "Why bring the human here?" "Because," she said, her voice soft, "there's something in you that the nexus recognizes. It called to you, just as it once called to me. You have a choice, Bax. You can turn away, go back to the life you knew, or you can see what lies beyond the veil." Her words hung in the air, weighted with meaning he couldn't quite grasp. Zura turned and placed her hand on a nearby column, her gaze never leaving his. Slowly, she began to whisper in a language that made the air around them shiver. The column responded, glowing brighter, its light shifting and swirling in patterns that seemed to defy logic. "What are you doing?" Vax asked, a thrill of fear mingling with excitement. "Opening a door," she replied, her voice barely audible. "One that leads to truths hidden from those who fear to ask." A low hum filled the chamber, and the light from the columns began to converge in front of them, forming a swirling portal that seemed to stretch into infinity. Bax could feel the pull of it, like a gravitational force beckoning him forward. "Are you ready?" Zura asked, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "I don't know, but I think I need to be." With a small nod, Zura stepped into the portal first, her form dissolving into light as she crossed the threshold. Bax hesitated for only a moment before following, the world around him dissolving into a cascade of colors and sounds that defied explanation. When the disorienting sensation faded, Bax found himself in a new space, a sprawling landscape that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, filled with lush alien vegetation and skies painted in hues he couldn't name. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flowers and the faint hum of creatures he couldn't see. "Welcome to the heart of the Nexus," Zura said, her voice reverberating through the strange, otherworldly landscape. "This is where the knowledge of countless civilizations converges. Each plant, each stone holds a memory, a story." Bax took a step forward, awe-stricken. He reached out to touch a nearby tree, and the moment his fingers brushed the bark, his mind was flooded with visions. A civilization long lost, an alien city with towering spires reaching toward a crimson sky, beings with shimmering wings who danced among the clouds. He stumbled back, overwhelmed. What was that?" "A memory," Zura explained gently. "The Nexus doesn't just store knowledge, it preserves the essence of those who came before. Every leaf, every stone here holds a fragment of the past. And you can feel it, see it." "Yes," she said, her gaze steady. "But only those who are open to it can truly understand. That's why I brought you here. I sensed that same openness in you." As they walked deeper into the landscape, Bax felt an intense connection to the world around him, as if it were alive in a way he had never experienced before. He could feel the weight of countless lives, stories that spanned galaxies, all woven together in the fabric of the Nexus. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed through the air, a low growl, followed by the rustling of leaves. "What was that?" he whispered, instinctively stepping closer to Zura. Her expression hardened, and she placed a protective hand on his shoulder. "Not everything here is welcoming," she murmured. "There are guardians within the Nexus, creatures that protect its secrets. They sense intruders and defend the heart from those unworthy of its gifts." The growling grew louder, and from the shadows emerged a creature unlike any Bax had ever seen. Its body was covered in iridescent scales that shifted colors with each movement, and its eyes glowed with an intelligence that was both beautiful and terrifying. "Stay calm," Zura instructed, keeping her voice low and steady. "They can sense fear, show no aggression, and it may let us pass." Bax swallowed, forcing himself to breathe slowly. The creature's gaze was fixed on him, as if weighing his worth. He stood still, meeting its eyes, trying to project a calmness he didn't feel. After a tense moment, the creature let out a low rumble, then turned and slinked back into the shadows. "You handled that well," Zura said, a hint of admiration in her tone. "Not everyone can face a guardian and remain steady." "I think I just aged 10 years, Bax replied, exhaling in relief. She laughed softly. "You'll find that courage is often the price of discovery." They continued onward, and as they walked, Bax felt a growing sense of purpose, an understanding that he was part of something far larger than himself. Here, in the heart of the Nexus, He was no longer just a man on a distant planet. He was a witness to the mysteries of the galaxy, a keeper of stories that spanned the cosmos. This journey isn't just about knowledge, Zura said, her voice contemplative. It's about transformation. By the time we leave, you won't be the same person who entered. And in that moment, standing in the heart of an alien world, Bax felt the truth resonate within him. The man he had been was already fading, replaced by someone bolder, someone who craved the unknown. The adventure was only beginning. The further they ventured into the heart of the Nexus, the more surreal their surroundings became. The landscape shifted like a living dream, constantly transforming with new shapes and colors. Trees with shimmering, translucent leaves loomed overhead, their branches stretching out like skeletal fingers. Pools of liquid light dotted the ground, casting ethereal reflections that seemed to whisper secrets as they passed. Each step deeper brings us closer to the Nexus's core, Zura explained, her tone calm but carrying an undertone of caution. But it also brings us closer to its trials. Bax felt a chill creep up his spine. Trials? He asked, not entirely sure he wanted to hear the answer. The Nexus tests those who seek its knowledge, Zura replied, her gaze fixed ahead. Only the worthy can pass. Each trial reveals something about the seeker, uncovering strengths or weaknesses. He swallowed hard, glancing around nervously. And if you fail, failure here means more than just turning back, she said, her voice laced with gravity. The Nexus has a way of holding on to those who don't prove themselves. A shiver ran through Bax, but he pressed forward, determination hardening in his heart. He had come this far, and despite the dangers, a part of him felt drawn to face whatever the Nexus had in store. Zura's presence beside him gave him a strange comfort, even as he questioned her true motives. They soon approached a clearing bathed in a faint golden glow, where an ancient-looking stone stood in the center, covered in symbols that pulsed with a rhythmic light. As they drew closer, the symbols on the stone seemed to shift and morph, forming shapes and patterns that tugged at the edges of Bax's memory. This is the first trial, Zura said, nodding toward the stone. It's a test of perception. The Nexus will show you images, fragments from your mind, dreams, or even fears. You must stay grounded in your truth. Let the illusions guide you, but do not lose yourself in them. Simple enough, he replied, though his voice betrayed his nerves. Zura's eyes softened with an almost sympathetic look. Remember, the Nexus knows your mind better than you do. What you see may be more real than you expect. Taking a deep breath, Bax approached the stone and placed his hands on its cool, rough surface. Instantly, his vision blurred, and the world around him dissolved. He found himself standing in a memory, back on Earth, surrounded by familiar faces in a crowded room. The warmth of home, the laughter of friends, the feeling of belonging washed over him like a wave. He could hear their voices, see their smiles, and for a moment, he was tempted to sink into the comfort of the memory, to lose himself in the familiarity. But as he glanced around, he noticed something strange. His friends' faces were fading, their features blurring as if they were being erased. "This isn't real," he muttered, shaking his head. "I'm in the Nexus." The memory flickered, then shifted. He was now standing in a place of complete darkness, his reflection staring back at him from a pool of inky water. His face looked different, older, worn, with eyes that held a weight he didn't recognize. "Is this who you fear becoming?" a voice whispered, the sound echoing around him. Bax clenched his fists, resisting the urge to recoil. "This isn't who I am," he said firmly. "And it won't be." The dark reflection dissolved, and the scene shifted again, returning him to the stone in the Nexus. He blinked, steadying himself, as the pulse of the symbols slowed, their light fading. Zura was watching him, her expression unreadable. "You did well," she said, a hint of approval in her voice. "Few make it through their first trial so quickly." He nodded, breathing a sigh of relief, though he could feel a lingering unease from what he had seen. "Is it always like that?" he asked, his voice laced with residual tension. The Nexus has a way of showing us what we most need to face, even if it's painful, she replied. But remember, each trial reveals a part of who you are. The more you confront, the stronger you become. As they moved on, a heavy silence settled between them, punctuated only by the soft sounds of the alien world around them. Despite the strange beauty of the Nexus, an underlying tension pulsed through the air, a reminder that danger lay ahead. "Why did you bring me here, really?" Bax finally asked, unable to contain his suspicion. Zura hesitated, her gaze distant. "I brought you here because I saw something in you. A potential. The Nexus doesn't just reveal secrets. It has the power to awaken something dormant within those who seek it. But not everyone can handle it. So I'm some kind of experiment," he said, a hint of bitterness creeping into his tone. "No," she replied softly. "I'm offering you a choice. The knowledge here, it's not just about seeing. It's about becoming. If you pass all the trials, you'll leave this place with something extraordinary." A long pause hung between them, and Bax could feel the weight of her words. The allure of the Nexus, with its mysteries and promises of power, tugged at him, tempting him to embrace the unknown. But he couldn't ignore the risks, the whispers of those who had failed, who had become trapped in the Nexus, lost to its depths. As they reached the next clearing, he glanced at Zura, his resolve hardening. "I'm ready," he said, determination shining in his eyes. She studied him, a faint smile touching her lips. "Then let's continue. The Nexus has more trials waiting, each more challenging than the last. But with each step, you'll grow closer to uncovering the truth." Bax nodded, feeling the surge of courage as he prepared for what lay ahead. The path forward was uncertain, shrouded in shadow and mystery. But he knew one thing for certain: he would see this journey through to the end. As they stepped forward, deeper into the heart of the Nexus, Bax felt an unspoken bond forming between them. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them, and in doing so, perhaps discover a part of himself he had never known. The adventure was far from over. The alien landscape shifted once more, and Bax could feel an almost palpable weight settling over them as they entered a new clearing. This part of the Nexus was darker, and the air felt thicker, charged with an energy that prickled against his skin. Ahead of them, a large reflective surface stood in the center of the space. It looked like a mirror, but its surface rippled like water, casting distorted reflections of the surroundings. Zura stopped just short of it, her expression unusually serious. "This," she said, her voice low, "is the mirror of intentions. The next trial." Bax studied the mirror, noting how his own reflection seemed to shimmer and waver, as though the mirror held a life of its own. "What does it do?" he asked, keeping his tone steady despite the apprehension building inside him. "It reveals your truest intentions," Zura explained, her gaze locked on the mirror. "Not what you tell yourself, but what you truly seek within the Nexus, and perhaps beyond it. Some find it enlightening. Others find it unsettling." A chill crept up his spine, but he nodded, steeling himself. "I'm ready." Zura stepped back, giving him space as he approached the mirror. Taking a deep breath, he reached out and placed his hand on its surface, feeling the strange warmth that spread through his palm. As he did, the reflection began to shift, showing fragments of memories, desires, and dreams he hadn't acknowledged in years. Images of his life back on Earth flickered before him, his family, his childhood home, memories of a simpler time, a place where he had felt safe and grounded. But as he watched, the scenes morphed, shifting to show him walking alone through strange, alien landscapes, driven by a sense of purpose he didn't fully understand. "You seek more than you admit," a voice whispered, echoing around him. "You crave something beyond the ordinary, a destiny that you fear to embrace." The words unsettled him, but he held his ground, focusing on the mirror as more images flashed before him. He saw himself in battle, facing impossible odds, standing against forces that defied comprehension. But he was not alone. Zura was beside him, her gaze fierce and unwavering, a silent bond forming between them as they fought side by side. He felt a strange pull toward the image, a recognition that ran deeper than he'd expected. There was a part of him that wanted this, not just the thrill of adventure, but the companionship, the unity in facing something unknown with someone who understood him. The mirror's surface rippled again, and he saw himself standing in the Nexus, alone this time, with a blinding light surrounding him. He held something in his hands, something small and pulsating with energy. A fragment of the Nexus itself, a piece of its infinite knowledge. The image filled him with an intense longing, a desire to understand, to connect with something greater than himself. Suddenly, the mirror's surface stilled, returning to its normal, reflective state. Bax pulled his hand away, his heart racing, as he tried to process what he had seen. Zura stepped forward, her eyes soft but probing. The mirror doesn't lie. Did it show you what you expected? Bax hesitated, glancing away. No, and yes, he admitted. I've always wanted something more than the life I knew. But I didn't realize just how deep that need ran until now. She nodded, her expression one of understanding. The Nexus has a way of showing us our deepest truths. Now that you've seen yours, you must decide how you'll carry it forward. And if I don't? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Then the Nexus will take back what it has shown, she replied, a hint of warning in her tone. It gives, but it also takes. You must be willing to accept the cost of the knowledge it offers. Bax felt the weight of her words settle over him. The Nexus had revealed something powerful, a glimpse of a life filled with purpose and connection, but it came with a price, and he could sense that leaving without this knowledge would be almost as painful as taking on the risks of claiming it. As they moved away from the mirror of intentions, he found himself glancing at Zura, wondering how much she had seen in her own reflections, how much of herself she had faced within the Nexus. There was a strength in her, a resilience that hinted at experiences he could only guess at. Why did you choose this path? He asked, curiosity lacing his voice. She didn't answer immediately, her gaze distant. I chose it because I wanted to see the universe for what it truly was, not just the surface illusions. I wanted to understand its secrets, and maybe even change them. Her words struck a chord in him, a recognition of a kindred spirit. They were both here for more than mere adventure. They were seekers, driven by the need to uncover truths, to find meaning in the vast unknown. They continued their journey in silence, the bond between them growing stronger with each step. Bax could feel a new sense of purpose igniting within him, fueled by the visions he had seen. The mirror of intentions had not only revealed his desires, but had also given him a glimpse of what he could become. As they neared the next trial, he steeled himself, ready to face whatever the Nexus held for him. For the first time, he felt a deep-seated confidence, a certainty that he would endure whatever lay ahead, not just for himself, but for the journey he had chosen to share with Zura. And somewhere, deep in his mind, a voice whispered, urging him onward. The journey isn't just about knowledge, it's about transformation. You've seen what lies within. Now, you must become it. The next trial awaited. As they moved deeper into the heart of the Nexus, the atmosphere grew heavier, thick with a sense of foreboding. The air was laced with a strange energy, vibrating with an intensity that made Bax's skin tingle. He glanced at Zura, noticing her unusually tense expression. "What's next?" he asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. "The trial of trust," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's one of the most difficult trials, because it doesn't just test your mind or your strength. It tests the bond between us, the connection that has brought us this far." Bax felt his heart race. The mirror of intentions had shown him his own hidden desires and fears, but this trial seemed poised to reveal something even more vulnerable. He could sense that whatever awaited them would require not only courage but a leap of faith, one that would bind them in ways neither had anticipated. "How does it work?" he asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty churning within him. "We'll each face illusions, challenges designed to prey on our deepest fears. The only way to pass is to trust each other, to see through the illusions and rely on one another to break them." They stepped into a clearing surrounded by towering pillars of dark crystal, each one gleaming with an otherworldly light. The ground beneath them shimmered, casting shadows that twisted and shifted in unnatural ways. As soon as they reached the center, a deep, resonant hum filled the air, and the world around them began to warp. Suddenly, Bax found himself alone, standing on the edge of a cliff that dropped into a churning sea of darkness. The air was cold, the silence deafening, and a feeling of intense isolation gripped him. He looked around, desperate to see Zura, but she was nowhere to be found. "Zura," he called out, his voice echoing into the abyss. "She's gone," a voice whispered, cold and hollow. "You're alone, just as you always feared you would be." Bax clenched his fists, trying to shake off the voice's taunting words. "This isn't real," he told himself, repeating the words like a mantra. "It's just another trial." But the voice persisted, whispering fears he had buried deep, fears of abandonment, of being lost in a universe that cared nothing for him. The more he tried to resist, the stronger the feeling of loneliness grew, until it felt as though it would consume him. Then, a faint voice reached him, cutting through the silence. "Bax, I'm here." It was Zura. Her voice was barely audible, but it was enough to steady him, to pull him back from the edge. He focused on her voice, grounding himself in its warmth and familiarity. "Zura, where are you?" he called, his voice filled with desperation. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Trust me." He hesitated, but he knew he had no choice. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes, allowing her voice to guide him. As he focused on her presence, the darkness around him began to recede, the isolation loosening its grip. Slowly, he opened his eyes, finding himself back in the clearing with Zura standing beside him, her hand resting on his arm. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with relief. She gave him a small, reassuring smile. "You're not alone, Bax. You never were." But before they could fully savor the moment, Zura's expression shifted, her gaze growing distant. The ground beneath them trembled, and suddenly, she was surrounded by shadows, figures that seemed to whisper her name in voices that were both familiar and haunting. Bax watched as she tensed, her eyes wide with fear he hadn't seen before. "Zura," he asked, worry lacing his voice. "What's happening?" She didn't answer, her focus entirely on the shadowy figures that encircled her. Bax could see the pain in her eyes, a struggle she was fighting alone. He could tell this was her own trial, one that struck at something deeply personal, a fear he didn't fully understand. "Zura," he said softly, reaching out to her. "Whatever you're seeing, it's not real. You have to trust me, like I trusted you." She looked at him, her expression filled with a mixture of fear and longing. "These shadows, they're from my past. People I left behind, choices I made. They're a part of me I can't escape." "Yes, you can," Bax insisted, his voice steady. "The Nexus is showing you illusions, but I'm here, and I won't let you face this alone." He took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. For a long, tense moment, Zura remained still, her gaze locked on the shadows. But slowly, she tightened her grip on his hand, and together, they stepped forward, facing the illusions side by side. As they moved, the shadows faded, their whispers growing faint until they disappeared completely. The trembling in the ground ceased, and the clearing grew quiet, a calm settling over them. They stood in silence, catching their breath, the weight of the trial lingering between them. The bond they had shared in facing each other's fears felt more profound, a connection forged through vulnerability and trust. "Thank you, Bax," Zura murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never faced that part of myself with anyone before. He gave her a small, understanding smile. Neither have I. But I think that's what the Nexus wanted from us. To show us that we're stronger together. She nodded, a look of gratitude, and something deeper in her eyes. They had passed the trial of trust, not just through courage, but through a connection that had grown stronger with each step of their journey. As they prepared to move forward, Bax felt a newfound sense of clarity. He had come to the Nexus seeking answers, but he had found something even more meaningful, a bond that made the journey worth every challenge. Ready for the final trial? Zura asked, her tone steady, though he could sense the anticipation in her eyes. He nodded, his resolve unwavering. Let's finish this. The final trial awaited, and with it, the promise of knowledge that would change their lives forever.